Let's go through a short example of omitted variable bias and see how it works. So a reminder from chapter 6. So let's imagine that we're interested in estimating this relationship. Average hourly earnings is a function of how much people smoke marijuana, how much people smoke pot. So imagine we have a large sample of 5,000 people, and we have a measure of how often they smoke pot, every day, once a week, more often than that. So we have some index that measures, and the bigger the index, the more they're smoking pot. And then we have a measure of their average hourly earnings. Let's suppose that it's true, so we're supposing, let's suppose that pot smokers are more educated than others. So there's a positive correlation between level of education and how much you smoke pot. So that correlation is positive. So what we have then is a relationship that we might imagine that pot directly lowers average hourly earnings, but there's a positive relationship between pot smoking and education positively affects earnings. So if we estimate this equation where we have pot alone in our regression, we might end up with estimates like this: 15.7 minus 3.2. So our coefficient is negative 3.2. The more you smoke pot, the lower are your average hourly earnings. But this estimate, 3.2, our reasoning is telling us that that estimate is biased. Smoking pot is actually worse than the coefficient is suggesting. If we control for education, so if we run the regression with pot and education as explanatory variables, we'll likely get something like this, where the coefficient on pot is now something like negative 8.1. That is, it's become a bigger negative number. Pot is negatively affecting average hourly earnings. Education, of course, is positively associated with average hourly earnings. So what happens when we exclude, if we exclude education, it looks like pot does not have such a negative effect, because a lot of the pot smokers are also highly educated, and so they're earning high wages. So that's the omitted variable bias. If we exclude education, if we didn't have education in here, we wouldn't estimate this coefficient. Instead, we'd estimate, as we saw before, we'd estimate a coefficient of negative 3.2. Doesn't look like pot is as bad as it actually is for your earnings in this setting. So that's a brief explanation of omitted variable bias. I encourage you to read the first section of chapter 6.